Joining. Oh, hello everyone that is joining. We are just getting set up here. We'll let a few of you join and then we'll get started having a chat. Just going to check our LinkedIn live stream. It says pre-live at the moment, which is not what I was expecting. So just try something else with that. Do you want to say hi, Steve? Tell people all about what you've been doing lately and why we're here today.
Yeah, let me buy you some time.
Thank you.
I'm Steve Pereira, joining you from Chicago on the road with a client. Happy to be here as always to talk to you, Helen, and talk about flow, our favorite subject. So I've been in tech for a long time, and I really got into the flow theme, solving problems, solving delivery problems, solving getting things done problems. And that led me to stumbling face first into value stream mapping, and I haven't looked back since. And luckily enough, I, discovered value stream management as the big picture that value stream mapping is a part of. And, that's the really exciting space. That's the space where we get into talking about business outcomes and things that matter in the real world beyond writing code and deploying it on machines. So very, very happy to be here and talk about it. Of course, I'm very happy to talk about the book. And answer questions. I think, what I would love from this session is to get as many questions about what's on people's minds, what problems they are encountering, what they're thinking about, and throw around whatever we can.
Perfect. Well, I'm still struggling with the LinkedIn Live. I closed my windows today. I was that confident that I had got it right. So I'm just going to have to reconfigure it all in the background. But we do have a little list of things to help us talk about things today. Last time we met, because this is like a kind of re-meet, because we met for half an hour before and it went so quickly and we had so many questions and everyone left really unsatisfied with the experience. Well, not unsatisfied, just felt like we hadn't gone on for long enough and gone deep enough and things. So we're meeting again today. I mean, you and I meet a lot, but we're meeting again in this format to talk about the wonderful book, Flow Engineering, that you and Andrew have written. So we have a list of things to talk about. So the first thing I wanted to discuss with you really was the flow roadmap. So this comes up in chapter 9 of Flow Engineering. There's kind of a big setup for it. So I wondered if you want to talk us through the setup and then get us to the moment the flow roadmap is introduced and then where that takes us next.
Yeah, I think that the flow roadmap is something that emerged out of the practice of initially value stream mapping, which led me to outcome mapping to try and figure out, what are we really trying to do? And then, you kind of progress through value stream mapping and you find all these opportunities where you find issues, you discover the impact of specific dependencies, and you collect all these insights from people who, sometimes they're communicating things for the first time or realizing things for the first time. Sometimes they are just getting an opportunity to talk about something that they haven't been able to put into words, or they weren't able to sort of point to something and say, like, that's the thing that, I've been struggling with and I haven't been able to kind of put my finger on it. And so what do you do with all that stuff, right? And I'm a huge fan of acting on, what you uncover in the practice of revealing insights, because I think it's really demoralizing to be in situations where you're like, okay, we had a bunch of problems. We know what to do about these things. Let's go back to our work and try harder next time.
Where you're like, oh.
So, like, what you will find, I'm sure everyone's had a retrospective like this where, the team comes up with all these great ideas. They're very committed to improvement. And then what comes out of that is, okay, well, like let's all try harder next time. And so the flow roadmap is really about acting on what you find and doing it in a way that it, our odds of getting it done and producing good results are maximized. So there's a couple of components that I kind of put into the flow roadmap to try to increase those odds of success, like measurements and owners of progress.
So that is leading us up to the moment. Sorry, I think I just got us live on LinkedIn again.
I could see
You
something
can
pop
hear
up.
it as well because it annoyingly, like it connects you and connects you with sound. So
No, I understand. I was trying to buy you some time, so I could go further and talk more about the details there, but we can.
So, so we've got these maps, haven't we? So we've got the outcome map, the current stream map, the future state map, and now we're like, okay, so we've got all these maps, but where are we going to go with it? So this is one of the big challenges. So this is great. I think it's Bolt, one of the little case stories in the book, and it talks about Sharon, and Sharon has realised that they've got, or she sees like the people have created like beautiful current value stream maps. And I've been here. I had one client who would only ever give me one day to do value stream mapping, and you can't do a current and a future stream map in one day. It's just like not physically possible in my personal experience. The way that I do it, it just takes too long to get that done. So what we do is we do the current state, and then about 4 o'clock, when we were all absolutely exhausted, and I'm terrible because I should have been Spanish and have siestas, but about 4 o'clock we'd be trying to do this future state map, and obviously in an hour or 90 minutes you wouldn't get very far. So in your book, Sharon describes this, that she that meets these teams and they've got these beautiful current state maps, or they've got no future stream map, or they've got a future stream map but like there's no way of getting there. So how does the flow roadmap build on these other maps, our outcome, our current, our future state, our dependency map, and take us to a place where our actions, our insights have become actionable?
Yeah, we iterated on this a lot, and I've iterated on this, I think, in every single client engagement I've ever done, always trying to kind of like find the best way of putting these things together. And so the goal of the future state or the flow roadmap is really about what are we going to do, but as much uh, or in equal part, what are we not going to do, right? So we want to figure out what is the most important thing for us to tackle and ignore everything else to some degree so that we can focus on the things that are most important right now. So in service of that, what we do is sort of like collectively pull out the things that we found in all of the previous maps, the things that, we think are experiments we could do, probes that we could go and investigate, actions that we want to take immediately. And we will plot those out in terms of, a couple of dimensions, right? So, a simple prioritization exercise where you're thinking about things in terms of importance, and what we use in the book and in regular practices, importance by feasibility. So how important is this thing? Like what's the relative value of each of these actions? What do we think will be the relative value of each of these actions? And then how feasible are they? Are they, really difficult to implement or really easy to implement? Do we have everything that we need to kind of implement it? And so by those two axes, you can sort of like plot each of these items. And what you really want to focus on today is the things that are in the top right, like the things that are, um, you know, very valuable and easy to do. We can do those right away. And then everything else gets kind of plotted to next and later. We don't want to lose track of those things. We want to acknowledge that those things are somewhat important and we do want to do them eventually, but we kind of lay them out in a way that we can focus on today.
We have quite a few questions coming through, so I'm going to start
I
with
can see that.
Mike. Mike says, do you have any suggestions on how to overcome challenges when you must help the organisation improve the process, but you cannot get a clear owner of the process?
Well, I think that what I would start with in that situation when we don't have an owner currently is, I mean, it depends. If you can't start mapping because you don't have an owner who will say, yes, let's go look at the value stream. I see that as more like a champion role. So as long as you have someone who says, yeah, let's do this, and they're willing to support it, that kind of key stakeholder role, then I think you're good. Not a lot of value streams have owners, right? Today, that's not a common thing. And so I think, you can get very far with just looking at what is this series of activities that is involved in the outcome that we're trying to achieve. Let's bring a bunch of people who represent those various stages together, and then we can figure out ownership of this thing afterwards, right? That's part of what you can get out of the flow roadmap, is that we assign ownership to each of the action items. And one of those things could be ownership and stewardship of the value stream, which should go to somebody who has, you know, uh, a vested interest in its success. They're incentivized on its performance, and they have kind of a management and continuous improvement area of focus. So, they might have a history in operations management, for instance, or someone who is helping to like optimize team performance. They would be a great candidate. And so you can assign ownership afterwards after what the stream looks like and then what you want it to do. Right? Do you want it to be more innovative? Do you want it to be faster to react? Do you want it to be higher quality, more consistent, more predictable? That can also dictate like who you get to own it, because people have specialties, right? They have different capabilities, and you can basically assign ownership, maybe even on a temporary basis based on what the stream needs.
I think ownership is such an interesting question. And when we think about a value stream being a collection of processes, it's like there's two different levels of ownership in my mind. There's the individual process owners, and then there's like the overall value stream owner. I have just put a reminder in the chat. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about it already, but of course we have our annual research, the State of VSM
Yes.
report, which is exactly set up to answer these type of questions. We're mapping trends like the amount of job titles that people have around value streams and the popularity of job roles like value stream architect. But you did say there, Steve, that it's still quite rare to see owners of specific value streams. Do you think that this is an important role when people are adopting value stream management ways of working, to actually recognise that there should be one person perhaps that has kind of ultimate purview over a particular value stream?
I think so. I think that person should have a backup, a counterpart that can support them and take over when they have to go on vacation or, things happen. But I think that, you don't always want to be wondering who to go talk to about something. And you don't want to always have these tie-breaking decision-making processes where you have to get consensus, or, you have to get two different opinions and then weigh them against each other and have people battle it out. Like, things get a lot faster, a lot simpler when you have ownership. You have a higher level of accountability, you have a higher level of clarity. I think all of that is a positive, right? For all the negatives of saying that this person owns this, and so it's kind of going to go the way that they may want it to go, you can introduce checks and balances to hedge against risks of ownership. But I don't think that you can get the same benefits of ownership by having no owner or co-ownership. That I think is very powerful, and something that people should really strongly consider. Like, I think everything should be owned, because things fall through the cracks when there's nobody accountable for, the success of any given activities or areas or domains.
So Mike has said, thank you, championing upfront has not been the challenge, but sustaining the improvements has been frustrating. I hear you, Mike. I think it's always quite exciting to get together and perform an improvement exercise, and then we realise how much work we're actually going to have to do and how challenging that might be. As a result, that becomes a little demotivating sometimes. So I hear you. I guess this is a big part of the coach's role, is to keep that momentum going. Let's take a question from Fortune. So Fortune has said, does Steve marry the value stream view with other systemic tools like CLD diagrams and loop diagrams to marry the mental models of the people and current ways of working with the value stream maps and flow map? I've not, but how does he incorporate these mental models? If not, sorry, how does he incorporate those mental models into his mapping techniques?
And this is a good question, and I think my thinking is always developing on this. And one of the guiding principles that I use in flow engineering is meeting people where they are. So I'm very, I think it's very important to walk into organizations and teams. If I'm inside an organization, let's say, I want to approach people with models and ways of thinking, ways of working that they're familiar with, and then help them get to something that is contributing to better outcomes. So that could be illustrating flow, illustrating a systems view using a model that they're familiar with. It could be a current reality tree, for instance. It could be a flow diagram. It could be a swim lane diagram. I think it's very important to leverage what folks are currently using as a model, what's currently informing their thinking, and then try to interface with that as much as possible. Try to say yes and present alternatives if it seems like there's an opportunity for more clarity, more accessibility, more flexibility. And so I think that really whatever mapping you use, it really depends on what's going to give you the benefits of mapping, right? The ease of creation, ease of consumption, that I think matters a lot. And I'm very I'm very accommodating to existing techniques, and I think that flow engineering kind of encourages substitutions. If you want to swap a value stream map for an event storming map, they're not one-to-one. They do different things, but if that's your starting point, that's the dominant method in the organization, then I would happily start there and say, what about this? How do you think about this type of data, looking at this specific flow? Because different illustrations will have different strengths and weaknesses. So I hope that
Never
answers the
one
question.
size fits all, is there? Yeah.
Not from my perspective, no.
No. I love that you said yes and. I don't know if you know is it Ariana Grande tune, Yes and? It's so catchy. Yes and. Love
I
it.
didn't know that.
I'll get it for you later. I'll send you a link. But in the meantime,
Beautiful.
Miguel has a lot of questions and they have all come through in one big list. And I said to him that I could easily unpick them, and I can, but they are kind of all quite related to each other. So you can
Great.
see them in the chat, but I'll talk through them anyway, and then I think we can probably answer them in one big bunch. So Miguel says, how do you incorporate an existing outcome, example from senior leadership, into an outcome discovery stage? That stage becomes about connecting day-to-day ideas and concerns with the outcome. How are the conversations before you start conducting the workshops, and what kind of questions do you ask to know how to move forward? And then this one is kind of about the outcome map, but it's actually related to the value stream mapping charter, which Karen and Mike in their book Value Stream Mapping proposed. And that charter can be built in about 4 weeks. And actually, I found it quite hard to get people to do a charter for me prior to workshops. So I used to have, I called it a value stream scope, which is a cut down version that I used to go through in the first half hour to an hour of a workshop and get them to complete it then. But the charter can be built around 4 weeks, outcome map in one session, what are pros and cons. And then we can probably do what lessons have you learned lately. But I think how do you prime the group at the start of a mapping session is similar as well. So I do that scope. I also have done things, I don't know whether you've done this, where I've done them, got them to do like an example map of getting a coffee. So just like practice a sort of a 5-minute value stream and get them into the flow. But anyway, I'll leave you with all those questions.
They are, I mean, I can tie them together, I think, maybe better than I would fear, if I had to tackle them all separately. But I'm on site with a client right now, and we had this exact problem. We had senior leadership had, you know, a vision. They have a list of things that they really want. They want the tech organization to move in a very specific direction aggressively, and they're looking for very specific outcomes. What we started with was knowledge of all of that. And then we went to the middle management in the organization and said, let's generate an outcome map from scratch. Tell us about your goals, your pains, your questions, your ideas, the surrounding context that's on your mind. And what we were hoping was that we would get to the leadership naturally. We were hoping for alignment, that it would just naturally emerge and we could connect the dots. And it was extremely challenging, and it was, I would say, unproductive, right? I wouldn't do it again. I don't often run into scenarios like this. It's been a while since I have. And in most organizations, you can connect those dots because there's more dots connected from senior leadership down to mid and lower level leadership. But in this case, there was, things went all over the place. People were talking about all kinds of different concerns, and it was a real challenge to try and connect the dots. But the biggest problem was at that level of the organization, they weren't used to talking about outcomes. They weren't used to talking in terms of outcomes, and they weren't used to talking in terms of long-term thinking, like distant time horizons. What are we ultimately trying to do? What direction are we headed in? They were fighting fires on a regular basis. They were worried about short-term concerns. They are looking at piling technical debt. They're looking at services that are going down on a regular basis, dependency challenges, interpersonal conflict between departments and leadership. And so, they were down here, leadership is up here in terms of, well, let's put this in terms of time. It's not really a question of strata of perception, but they had short-term concerns. They were thinking short-term. They couldn't really afford, I'm thinking of like Maslow's hierarchy, right? So leadership is up top. They can look into the distance because other people are taking care of the fires in the day-to-day. So it was very challenging. What we kind of resolved to do in future sessions was to present leadership's, rendition of the outcomes and say, these are examples and this is the type of thing that we're heading towards. But then do the bottom up and allow them to reconcile and give them examples of what good looks like, what we're looking for that helps them navigate, right? Because they had no real target. They were kind of wandering through, okay, well, this is all the stuff on my mind. These are all things that I want. And they were highly siloed, right? They were very functional. And so doing that reconciliation was, it was confusing to them, and it was very difficult as a facilitator. I don't recommend it. So I would bring that initial context, would collect it as well. First thing you want to do is find out what are your OKRs, what are your key initiatives, what are the things that the organization is trying to do, what have they tried to do in the past, what are the things that are failing right now. So because you want to be sensitive to those things, you want to keep in mind the targets. All this context kind of informs outcome mapping, and that's how you can kind of shortcut this process and fit it into a session. you do pre-work, you do your collection, your discovery if possible. But of course, you can just have people sort of dump that in the session if they understand the context, if they understand the time horizon you're talking about, if they understand what an outcome is versus an output. Um, Depending on the audience, that might not be obvious to them, right? They might even just trip over that difference. Uh, so maybe that covers part one. Um, Outcome mapping versus a charter. I think that, when I think about a charter, it has an advantage of being kind of signed off, right? I think it's actually very powerful mechanism to have a charter that lays out everything and then says, basically by signing here or by, reading this and not disputing it, we're getting your commitment to see this through. And I think that is very powerful. And, if it takes 4 weeks because people are, negotiating that and they are working on, okay, well, what this wording really matters and whatever gets put in here is going to be what we're basically moving towards for the next 6 to 8 weeks or whatever it is. I think that is powerful. I would say that depending on your situation, depending on your environment, that kind of care, that kind of investment, that kind of definition and clarity and commitment can be extremely valuable. It can even be expected, right? If I'm walking into a highly standardized, predictable, large scale environment where they're used to a lot of structure, then an outcome mapping workshop, might be a little bit too wild for them. It might be, it might, it might have to it might be outside the Overton window of that organization, right? They might be very uncomfortable with something like that. So in those environments, we might start with a charter and say, let's lay this out. And then what we're going to do is something for fun, right? We're going to do something a little bit more generative and layer on top of that to maybe collect some information that didn't come up in the definition of the charter. So you can combine them, you can use one or the other. I wouldn't say that one is superior to the other. They have strengths and weaknesses, and they have very different, levels of investment. If everything in flow engineering is kind of leaning towards that environment of we have to move fast, we don't have a lot of time, we've got to get to action as quickly as possible, and we're optimizing for that the whole time.
It's very interesting when we talk about the silos as well, in the context of a charter. We're kind of coming back round. I think this question was probably asked when we were talking about roles, but I think it's a good point or a good time to come back around to it now. Because one of the things we do when we talk about the scope and the charter is talk about who's involved with the value stream. And Jamie said, what lessons have you learned about who or which roles must be in a value stream mapping activity, please? And I've always found this one very interesting because in Karen Martin's recommendation, she always talks about getting the most senior people you can in a room. And in my experience, it's important to have a few of them because they're the people in a traditional hierarchy that hold the money and can make decisions about like fundamental changes that you might need to the structure and the way that an organization works. But they're generally not the people that do the work. So those kind of process owners that we were talking about, the doers, they're not normally that senior exec level. So for me, I've always tried to get a mixture of those two types, broad types of people in the room, kind of the doers and the decision makers. But in terms of the actual roles, because what we're doing in a value stream is we are crossing all those silos, you can't really put a list that says, well, you need a tester and a marketing director and a security guy. It's like, it depends, doesn't it? It depends on the value stream.
Absolutely. And I think the principle I use to kind of inform that is just representation. Like I want to have a perspective from each of these domains that are part of the critical path, part of creating as much of the breadth of the picture as possible. And, you know, I will opt for breadth before I opt for depth, right? I want scope of the value stream before I want perfect detail or I want to dive deep because I don't necessarily know where I want detail. I don't want detail everywhere. I want detail where I see challenges, where I see opportunities. Um, so I would opt for folks that represent the fullest breadth of the value stream that's possible. And an interesting thing that I ran into recently with another client is we invited a leadership stakeholder to the mapping session, and he wouldn't shut up. Like the environment was very much the loudest people in the room dominate. They run the whole show. They're used to, running the meetings. They're used to being front of the room. And so we had a very unproductive mapping session until I kind of paused for an intermission when talked and, corrected or addressed that scenario. But, you know, this leader was just used to being the, up on the soapbox. And so, it had a dampening effect on everybody else's contribution. I had to keep interrupting to say, like, they just go off on, on a rambling rant about whatever was on their mind. And so as much as a leader, we hope for the best, we can also get the worst, right? We can also get that domineering, uh, single-threaded um, channel of information. So I think it's very important, back to what Miguel was talking about, I think is in your initial fact finding, your initial discovery, you want to understand a little bit about what's the environment of the organization like. And so hopefully your key stakeholder, the person who's bringing you in, or the person that you're partnering with inside your organization, can give you a sense of what is the culture like here? Is it very egalitarian? Is it pretty flat? Or do you have the highest paid person in the organization running the conversation and just telling people what to do without listening for feedback or asking for feedback or interested in, being a part of an exercise where it's very much contribution from the bottom up. And their role is to just encourage, right? And support and then act on or be aware of the things that are coming up, right? Like consume the signals. You're not there to produce the signals. And you're there as a privilege, right? I mean, you're there to sort of drink from the fire hose of what everyone is saying that they don't say on a regular basis, or you don't get the chance to connect to their daily work. So I think it's really important to understand, when you're bringing that key stakeholder in, what kind of leader are they, and what kind of influence are they going to have on the session?
So I just wanted to share with you something quite fun that's happening on the LinkedIn Live, because another Steve said there, is anyone else looking around to see if Steve P is on site at their company? And I said he's in Chicago, if that helps. And he said mostly his description of a dysfunctional environment sounded familiar. So I think I have sympathy. When I was doing a lot of consulting, I used to talk about the Phoenix Project, and everyone would say I was reading the Phoenix Project and I felt like I was living in the Phoenix Project. I think the only thing that I could say that maybe makes people feel a lot better is that everyone's in a similar position, right? We have this idea of unicorns and perfect companies, but most people live in very complex, sophisticated working environments where not everything's perfect and there is plenty of scope for improvement. But I had a friend of mine that doesn't work in our industry that came around for dinner last week, and they were asking about Cloudflare. And the point I made was there's thousands, if not millions, maybe even a billion of us working in this industry every day, making these incredible systems that do incredible things and provide, wonderful customer experience beyond anything we've achieved before. And they very occasionally go wrong. Most of the time we're doing quite well. So I thought, Steve, that might make you smile as well. Maybe you'd have something to help people realise that whilst we may all live in slightly dysfunctional systems, there are many elements of quite functional parts to them as well.
Absolutely. And I think that, every organization, every team, every environment is kind of like one realization away from changing everything, right? There are moments, and some of the magic that I've seen in mapping is there are absolutely moments where you see something you've never seen before, or you're seeing things in a way that you were never able to before, and that can change everything. Like a lot of what happens in these workshops is, we go in thinking that it's your typical meeting, and what we come out with was like that we actually built something. We've never built anything in a meeting before. We've never started from, a blank canvas and come out with something that helps us work better tomorrow, brings us closer together. We've gone through maybe workshops that were like team building workshops, but they don't have a direct influence on what happens tomorrow, or, reorganizes our thinking in such a direct and applicable way to our jobs, right? Our jobs together. We can go through a lot of these things that maybe, you know, help us forge an emotional bond, psychological bond, a bond of camaraderie. But I think what's magical about looking at the maps in flow engineering and value stream mapping and all kinds of different mapping in this type of work is that we're connecting it to the work, right? It's connected directly to that thing that we do every day. And that's really powerful. Like it goes beyond like, how do you handle a difficult conversation, or how do you become closer to your colleagues? You can get closer to your colleagues when you're looking at the same problems the same way, with the same model of the system that you're in, and you understand that to a deeper degree.
So I'm going to try and bundle two questions together, one from Fortune and one from Greg. So Fortune's basically saying that sometimes people are wanting to do this work, but if they haven't got ownership, they haven't got a budget holder, and then they are struggling with that. And I think my view on that would be what's happened to me is you've ended up just going up the hierarchy until you found a leader that does have a budget that recognises there is an opportunity. And sometimes those budgets come directly out of a learning bucket, an L&D bucket, in my experience as well. So it's been under like an education session. So obviously it's not like a classroom, and there's no exam at the end, but it's come out of that sort of budget. And then sort of related to that, I think, is Greg's question, because it's about expectation setting. So it's about kind of what are you selling to these people as a consultant? How many times are you going to meet with them? What's their expectation in terms of their time investment? So it's not just about what they're going to pay you as a consultant to do it, but what they're going to give into the process to make it work. What's your view on those things?
Well, that's been a very critical aspect of why the mapping sessions are so lean, like so small and tightly managed. We get into a flow engineering session, and then it's like we have 5 minutes to do this, and then we've got 5 minutes to do the next thing. We have 5 minutes to do this, and it's very tightly managed because it's very difficult to ask for time. It's very difficult to ask for people for a 4 week investment, or a 4 day investment, or even a full day investment. And so I've been very conscious of those constraints myself. I think from the the very inception of this for me was, how do I do this with my teams and not pull them away from their work for too long? Because I want them to be working. I want them to be productive. I don't want them to be in meetings and workshops and sessions unless I'm seeing a huge return on investment from those activities. So the constraints on time, this kind of inverse Parkinson's maneuver where you compress the time and you get a lot done because, a deadline's an incredible thing. And then these time boxes are mini deadlines that, you tend to meet deadlines when they're very clear and actionable and you have clear instructions. So I would say for folks who are struggling to justify it, tried to address that with things like the flow engineering game, like run the game version uh, over lunch hour at a retro in some time where you have a time box that you might dedicate to something that you can skip for the week. You could skip for an iteration. You could substitute for something else. Maybe a meeting gets canceled and you keep that time block because it was already spent. Run that, see if there's interest in going further, right? There's like one of the things in flow engineering that kind of informs the flow of activities as well is map to show some value and leverage that to go further, right? Like show value out of what you're doing and then take that and invest it in the next thing and invest it in the next thing.
So a bit more on the ownership conversation from Jamie. Jamie says, I'm lucky to be working with an organisation that has stood up several value streams, each with a value stream owner, but they have not matured as an organisation to the point that they understand value streams in the org, and the role is very misunderstood. My concern is that they went too far too soon. Do you have any lessons learned in that type of situation, please? Also, do you have a reference for a value stream owner role responsibilities, please? God, I think, Steve, we've had that on the backlog for 3 years, I think, at the VSMC, haven't we, to put together some roles, but perhaps I should read.
Yeah, I'm sure
There's
there's
something in the
draft
course.
versions of all of this, right?
Yeah.
And yes, you're right. The course does cover this a bit, more extensively. I honestly
Yeah, the
can't
course
remember right
being,
now.
I should mention, the Value Stream Management Foundation course from the VSMC. I'll just put a link to that in the chat just now.
This is a good question, though. I think that you have ownership and you have value streams, and you're not seeing positive outcomes from that you can demonstrate back to the organization. Then I think you really have to kind of reevaluate what job that is performing. What benefit is that providing to you? Because you did it for a reason, right? So like I would step back to those things that you expected to achieve by doing it and then try to tell that story. Try to, you know, prove or disprove the hypothesis, understand the delta if there is one, and then, talk about the difference that it's made for you. I would imagine that if you've got clear ownership, that there's simpler communication. If that's not true, if people are still going around, or now they're talking to one additional person in addition to all the people that they were talking to before, um, or that owner isn't really an owner. That owner doesn't clearly understand their role, which I think is essentially providing direction for the value stream in terms of long-term strategy, but also measurement and management of its performance. So what are the metrics that you're gathering and how are you communicating those back to the organization? And I think that has to be done often. Like there's a weekly cadence to that, there's a monthly and a quarterly cadence to that, certainly. And I think if the value stream has actually addressed flow concerns, is actually providing improved performance of throughput, for instance, or quality or value delivered, then part of the job is communicating that and and understanding the difference between where you were before and where you are now in a way that you can communicate the overall trajectory or the long-term trajectory. So I don't know how you're kind of defining the value stream owner role, but that's what I think of when I think about what that role means. And a lot of it is communicating what is hidden inside of the value stream to folks who are outside, who want to understand, like, how's it going. And I think that's a big part of it, just collecting that information and surfacing it to people in a form that they can easily understand, especially if it's working extremely well. Then you kind of owe it to everyone to show that you have a working model that might be portable to their context.
We're kind of out of questions nearly from the audience. Well, there is a comment from Patrice, which I found kind of interesting, which he basically is asking whether, I think it was a customer you were talking about earlier, whether they actually had a definition of what an outcome is. And I was wondering, I can't remember seeing it in flow engineering, but it's like an assumption that we all know what an outcome is, but how would you define an outcome?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think that I probably skip this step more often than I'd like to admit. But I think, when I'm thinking about an outcome, it's almost like a visionary statement of a a future that hasn't yet happened. And this is kind of informed by an exercise that I took when uh, I got certified as a product owner a million years ago. Um, and part of the training process was a product box exercise where, you kind of draw up a rendering of, a product. So you want the name to be catchy, you want it to be prominent, you want the benefits to be listed on there. And so, and then you sort of like use that to guide what good looks like. What are we heading towards? What do we want to occur in the future? What is the destination we're hoping to reach? And I think, another way to frame this, and probably a simpler way, is what is the change that we want to uh, to deliver, right? What is the change that we want to see from the current state to, something that's closer to ideal? So I think that, that's not a concise definition. I probably have one laying around somewhere, and I couldn't tell you what we say directly in the book, but it's a good reminder to go back and see what we do say. We probably say five things five ways, but when I think about it, it's kind of like, what is the destination that we're going to work backwards from? We go into Google Maps, we set the destination, and then we choose things like route. We choose like, how do we want to get there? And then only then do you get to your first instructions on where should you go? What should be your first step? And a lot of people, I think, are, they're focused on their next step because they've been walking, right? They're in the mix, they're in the work, they're in the flow of things. They might not be heading in the right direction, or they might not really know their direction anymore. They might be a little bit lost, but they're kind of going through the motions. So I think that, it's an opportunity to kind of make sure that our next step is the best one given our target, given our objective.
So I wanted to talk about dependencies as well. We actually only have about 10 minutes left, but it's kind of, we've got another question from Declan actually, who I was chatting with earlier. So it's not a surprise that he's put this question in here, but he wants to talk about technical debt and flow. I think it might be worth talking about the flow metrics and flow distribution and the work items in the context of that question, but that also links us to dependencies. So go. Wasn't really a question. It was just like, let's talk about that.
Well, I think dependencies had to be a major part of flow engineering because, it's very easy to map a value stream and identify a constraint, identify a bunch of opportunities, and then have no way forward because the challenge, the opportunity is beyond your control. Right? It's like involves some other group, and you now have to go and either abandon hope or go and try to negotiate with them on your behalf, right, for your benefit. So I think that that's a really challenging situation. We need, really targeted techniques to address it because you want that conversation to go well. You want to be armed with data. You want to be armed with something that helps you have a productive conversation. And before any of that happens, you want to be able to understand it to whatever degree that you can, so that you go into that informed and you're not just asking for, this other group to do something for you, even if it's in service of the organization or service of customers. It's not what they were planning on working on, let's say, and they probably are working on some other stuff. So dependency mapping was kind of a way of just digging a little bit deeper into creating something that you could work with this external group on for the greater good, and hopefully having a better conversation than, you know I'm always blocked by X, and what can you do about it? What can we do about it? What can I do about it? And the more I've spent time with dependencies, the more I'm starting to think about the value stream network, the interconnection between all these value streams. Because what's interesting about when you map a value stream and you find a constraint, chances are all the value streams that are like it have the same constraint, right? Things like data, access to data, or, quality of data, um, integrations, things that are these critical common interconnections in the organization. And you have to have a pretty strong complement of information and understanding, at least of the problem, to work effectively with these groups, because they often have their hair on fire, right? They're like constantly interrupted. Everyone is always saying, "You're the reason I'm slow. Why can't this be done faster? Why am I back here again? Like, I thought you fixed it." And so they have very little time to be entertaining individual streams where, like, well, you are, a huge chunk of this lead time. Uh, you are a huge reason why we kind of are lacking clarity on how this works and how best to leverage the specific capability, et cetera, et cetera. So I think mapping out uh, dependencies in relation to value streams puts them in the context of the big picture. We're not just asking for this for us. This is a customer outcome that we're aiming for, and this is a consequential series of actions that matters a lot to the business. And I could show you how, you know this is the thing that is having the greatest influence on our performance right now. And to whatever extent I can, I would love to help. But I don't see a way to improve this without involving you. At least bring it to your attention and asking if there's anything that, you know, that I don't know, and, if there's anything that we can do to address this.
A couple more notes I've made before we got on. One was about cybernetic principles that you mentioned. I think it was in chapter 9 or 10, and how they can amplify the work we're doing with value stream mapping exercises, value stream ways of working. So can you explain to me what these cybernetic principles are and how they help us here?
I think that the biggest takeaway from cybernetics for me was trying to wrap my head around the best way to approach getting to action, right? Like getting something done. And so, we threw this idea of, are we looking for clarity first? Is value the first thing? You know, should you set a target before you have all the information? And so cybernetics was kind of like a light bulb moment for me of just breaking down very simply, what are the elements of acting on something, of getting something done. And, the more I kind of teased it in my head and kind of wrote it out, and used it as a reference for thinking about different activities and different things that, we do as technologists, as folks who are interested in delivery and continuous improvement, it's very, very difficult to understand the context of a system or a system at all unless you're understanding what it's trying to achieve or what you're trying to achieve with it, because the scope is enormous, right? If you try to collect all the information on something without understanding why you're doing that or what you're trying to do, then you never stop. You never have a boundary of this is enough information, or we're good, we can move towards action, we have enough information to act. So it really appealed to me as a way of managing scope, of saying, given our target outcome, given what we're trying to achieve, this is enough information to allow us to move forward, because we know we can confidently act and we will be moving in that direction. But it also means that we can ignore everything that's not related to the target outcome, at least for now, right? We can act, we can synthesize our understanding of what happened as a result, and then we can go do it again, and we can do it very quickly because it's all very minimal, right? We're trying to aggressively manage scope in service of rapid iteration, right? Ignoring everything in service of getting things done and then moving on to the next thing. And I think we really love detail. We love to have confidence in our understanding of what's going on and all the moving pieces. But that can take a lot of time, and it involves a lot of cognitive load. We can tumble down rabbit holes. We can involve people who may or may not be consequential to achieving the outcome. And so I think the idea of setting a target and then understanding what is the difference between where we are and that target and what action will move us towards the target is really, really powerful, really easy to remember, really easy to understand. And it's a pattern that we see everywhere, right? We see it over and over again in every system, uh, natural systems and synthetic systems, which I found really fascinating. So that gave me a lot of confidence that this is something that we can count on, we can use as a solid foundation.
Wonderful. I've been busy putting links in the chat. So I've been putting links in for our survey. I need more data. So please fill out the survey, share the survey for the state of VSM. We have Flowtopia coming up. Our big live online this year event is coming up on November the 19th. Registration is now open. It opened on Monday, so we're super excited for that. Also looking for sponsors to help us make it as big as possible. Also looking for speakers. On that Flowtopia page, you'll find a link for the call for speakers as well. I put the whole events page in there as well because we've got a ton of flow sessions coming up also. The next one is on August the 22nd, and I'll be chatting with Alan Manuel of PlanView about why more organisations are adopting VSM. So we'll be giving you some case stories and sharing with you some of the data we have about the increased adoption of these ways of working, thanks to things like flow engineering. So a massive thank you to Steve, as always. I think I'll probably see you at a board meeting and here and there, but I'm very excited that I will be seeing Steve in about a month in London when Steve is coming over to speak at the Fast Flow conference, and we are having a mini Flowtopia in London at the Amazon headquarters in the City of London the night before on September the 9th, I think that is, with the Fast Flow conference on September the 10th. So again, you'll find a link to that on our events page. Love to see you there if you happen to be in London. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us and all of your very active chat and conversations. Steve, is there anything you would like to say to everyone before we hang up today?
No, I hope that folks continue to ask questions. Like, I would love to hear from folks on LinkedIn, either publicly or privately. Send me a message or post and tag me. Uh, I love this interaction. I love hearing the questions that folks have, especially after writing the book, because there's we couldn't put everything in, and I'm learning stuff all the time, right? Like live with clients and working through different scenarios, and different cases. We're doing things like marketing value streams and procurement processes and things that, were not part of the scope when we were writing the book. So all that learning is stuff that I hope informs people's real life when they go, and their opportunity to try this is in learning and development or somewhere else. So thank you for the questions. Keep them coming. And I'll see you on the next one.
Yeah, thanks everyone. See you somewhere sometime soon. Bye for now.